Hi friends, today I'm going to explain how to get queue items having specific values from a specific queue using Orchestrator HTTP request. So here I have one queue which name is performer, which contain some queue items. So each queue items contain some data such as batch, name, mark. So today I am going to use Orchestrator HTTP activity to get queue item details, which queue item contain batch 1. So here there are 3 queue items which contain batch as 1. So I need to get the details of that 3 queue items. So you can see batch 1. So there are 3 queue items. So in Orchestrator HTTP request, we need to give relative endpoint. So from where we can find this relative endpoint? By using a Swagger which is similar to Postman, we will be able to find endpoints for API calls from the Swagger. So to get Swagger, we need to append the word Swagger with the orchestrator URL up to orchestrator. Then we will be able to open Swagger. So first we need to authorize the account. So I am authorizing. So here we can trigger jobs, we can find folder details, we can find queue details, assets, everything from Swagger. So I have authorized. Need to authorize Swagger. So we can find the account details, queue details, folder details, everything by using the Swagger. We will be able to find the details. So for get queue items, we can find get queue items and we need to add the folder ID and need to execute. So folder ID also we can find from the orchestrator URL. So it's 200 and currently we will get all the details of the queues available in that folder. So currently in that folder only one queue which have 7 queue items details are there. So we will be able to see that in the JSON response, and also the status will be 200 as the API request was successful. So we will be able to see all the details of the queue items of all the queues in that particular folder ID folder which we have given. So we will be able to see the details of that 7 queue items of the queue. So if there is another queue, we will be also able to see the queue details of that queue also. So if we will be able to see all the queue item details of every queues of that particular folder which we have given. So we can see every details here. So let's try this endpoint in Orchestrator HTTP request activity. So for that we need to take the endpoint. So I am copying the endpoint. and let's paste it in the relative endpoint field of the orchestrator HTTP request, and let's save the response, JSON response, in a variable which I have given the name response. So it's already created, so I'm giving response variable to store the JSON response of the API call, and to store status code I'm using status variable. So let's use log message to see the response and status to print the details. So we can use deserialization activity to deserialize the JSON response which we get from the API request, and after that we can use the values after deserializing the JSON string to JSON objects. We will be able to use the variables in the process. So let's run. So the board ran successfully. So let's see the output. So the status was 200 and the response contains all the details of the queue items of queues of that particular folder. So then after this we can use deserialization to deserialize the JSON response, and after that we will be able to get the specific values, number, counts, everything. So I need to get queue item details of a particular queue which contains specific data. We need to filter the API request. So for that we need to specify the queue ID and also what specific data which it contains. So to get the queue ID, same we will get from the orchestrator URL. We will be able to find the queue ID from there in the URL after taking the queue items. So we need to give the queue definition ID equal that queue ID, particular queue ID which we take from that orchestrator URL, and contains, we need to get the queue items which contains one batch, so which contains specific data 1. So this API request will give all the queue items which contain one as batch from that particular queue which we have mentioned the queue ID. So let's execute. So the code is 200, which means the request is successful. So we will be able to see that the count is 3. So we know that there are only 3 queue items which contain batch 1. So we are able to get all the details of that 3 queue items from that particular queue performer which we have mentioned the queue ID. So for every queue there will be this queue ID unique, and we will be able to get the queue ID from that orchestrator URL after getting into the queue. So we can see that batch 1 and name mark of every queue items which contain 1 as the batch. So now let's copy this endpoint and let's try this from the orchestrator HTTP request activity also. So I am copying the endpoint from the Swagger. So let's paste it in the activity. Now let's debug the process. So let's check the output. The bot ran successfully. So the status code was 200, which means the request was successful, and we can see the JSON response which contain all the details of the 3 queue items which contain batch 1 from that specific queue performer by giving that queue ID. So then after getting this response JSON, we can deserialize it and we can use in the process to get specific values or count of the queue items, etc. So I hope you understand how to use HTTP orchestrator HTTP request to get queue item details, and by how to get endpoint using Swagger.